And we are recording. Hello, people listening to this. This is Esther Ellis. Use she, her pronouns, and I have traveled after dropping episode 12 of the Goblet Wire about 3,000 miles from the West Coast to the East Coast to now deep in the woods with co-creator and writer on the Goblet Wire, Justin Hellstrom.
Yeah, happy to have you out here in the haunted hollows of Sandy Springs where the leaves are all gone and the sky is gray.
And you got cats here and everything.
There are cats.
I saw a theremin downstairs.
There's a theremin.
Very applicable to my interests.
Old piano, weird mid-century furnishings.
Yeah. If you don't know anything about either of us outside of listening to the show, for one, good for you. We are both podcast creators, primarily in the fiction category. You've made an excellent surreal show, The Great Chameleon War, which we've shouted out on this show. I have made a isolation horror show set in Antarctica called Station Blue. And then we do a lot of other editing and sound design and stuff for other projects. My most notable one being Dungeons and Daddies, which eats a lot of my time. You've got true crime and Magic the Gathering and
everything under the sun.
True freelancer.
Game stuff. I mean, a real worm in the indie scene just put me in the mud, baby.
Yeah, and then not present here are Eli Barraza, who I left back on the West Coast, and Tozaman, who's some couple hundred more miles north of here. But collectively, this is the first group of people I brought together to create the Goblet Wire a while back. We're going to talk about that a little bit, and then we're going to answer questions because a number of you sent in questions, and we want to talk about them. But for this first Q&A episode, I have a cue for you, Justin.
Yes.
I don't remember contacting any, I remember being like, I finally have it, right? I've had the right dreams have happened in the right order, and I've taken the right notes, and I know what this thing is. I don't know how to communicate what it is, and I need your help. But I do not remember what the other side of it was, because I already had this whole system living in my head. What was that like? What was your experience? What was your introduction to the Goblet Wire?
My first introduction was when I put out Chameleon War. You were kind of the first audio drama person to reach out online and be like, "Oh, hey, you're cool. Let's talk." And that meant a lot to me. And then, the show had been out for a bit, and you just kind of pinged me on Twitter like, "Hey, I got an idea for a show. Would you be willing to hop on a call and talk about it?" I was like, "Sure." So I was a little skeptical because I hadn't really worked with other people on like a larger audio type project. And I didn't really know what you wanted, but I would say during that conversation, of which I have a notebook full of doodles.
We found the notebook with art that we will put up somewhere where people can look at it.
Yeah.
With some just disjointed words such as tiki bar and...
It's very much like if the birth of the Goblet Wire is represented by this page of just lots of, individual weird parts all kind of slapped together on a page. And that's kind of what it was like. You had some really core concepts there with die, coin, the idea of kind of like this phone call-in bizarre game. And I was like, yeah, this sounds rad. It reminded me a bit of some of the stuff I'd encountered in Disco Elysium, which you had not played yet.
Mm-hmm. Well, I had started Disco Elysium.
Oh, you had?
I had started it, and then my file got deleted. I started playing it because I only have Macs because I travel a lot, as is evidenced by the fact that I'm thousands of miles from home right now recording this thing. And so I had to wait for the game to be available on Mac, and then it had been on my radar, and then I got like a few hours into it, and then when I came back to play it, my file was just gone. And I was like, no, and I hadn't gotten the heart to jump back into it because I was really enjoying my playthrough. And then Disco Elysium is a video game for the audience that doesn't know it. If you like the Goblet Wire, you'll definitely love Disco Elysium. Oh, yeah. I would argue one of the most important games of the last decade. I don't know too many people who would disagree with that.
No, not at all.
And you're like, there's a thing in Disco Elysium that this reminds me of, which was kind of, from what I gather in post, their version of like in the Pokemon games when you'd go up in like a skyscraper and in red and blue and you'd talk to like all the Game Freak developers and you're like 9 and you're like, what is going on here? Because you don't quite understand meta elements. Yeah. But for them, it was like this role-playing game played through radios with like a hub.
Yeah, there's a radio computer, and you can talk to an operator who seems to be just alone in this kind of, operational chamber that you need to give a passcode to, and there's a bit more there that I wouldn't go into, but it really, their idea of it in game was very kind of fantasy based, and when you talk to me, it seemed like we could aesthetically and thematically sort of do whatever we wanted to.
And mine, we'll get into this later, but like I'm a deep player of the OSR, the old school renaissance of role-playing games, which tends to just mix a lot of, dreamlands and industrial stuff and just kind of take these different like cast-offs of the human imagination, say they get, swept down a river, where do they end up? And that was kind of the core of what I was going to introduce with my episodes, at least.
Oh, yeah.
With Goblet Wire, which my episodes being the ones featuring the Sea King.
Right. I mean, right here, I have written down pilot in media res, the Union Strike, Doc Baron, and even the player attributes and stuff. And from that first conversation, the way that you laid out how you wanted to bring people on, how you wanted the show to really function, did not change. I mean, you'd really thought it out. And sure, we fleshed some things out with, I wrote my pilot for it and kind of used that to hone in on some things that we wanted to use or that could be flexible, what was going to be kind of canonical in the way that things needed to work. And it just worked. I mean, we didn't do a whole lot of, we didn't sit there halfway through and be like, oh, we have to nix this whole idea or anything.
Yeah, at most it was, you would write just the most fascinating operator, voiced by Nate McDonald. That's who we ended up casting for that role, because it's like, all right, this is gonna be the guy for that. But I'm also like, I can't write like this, and so we're gonna need multiple operators, which was already something I had talked about with like, we'll do Goblet Wire episodes in other languages, which is going to require a variety of operators. So that door was already open. But yeah, I remember I went and played Disco that week. And then when I found that thing, because I think it's an optional place, like their role-playing game, I was like, yes, this is the vibe, right? Different. I have since talked to game developers about it, and they're like, the thing they got out of that area was like, oh, this is a commentary on when you have a really ambitious idea that you run out of funding for and blah, blah, blah. But for me, I'm just like the aesthetics of like this. And then there's another game that I bugged you about called Inscription.
Oh, yeah.
That came out as we were working on releasing the Goblet Wire that also felt very in with the thing. So I felt like a lot of creators have been drinking this Kool-Aid. And then 2022, we've just had this boom of weird fiction in the indie audio drama space that I've been really excited about, because in me bringing Goblet Wire on, I'm like, I feel like the audio drama scene is losing some of its bridges to the old weird fiction internet that birthed shows like Night Vale or Richard Penner, the time scanner who voices the dictator, has the Infinite now. Like when I got into the audio drama scene, it's like, oh, these were kind of in these like weird back alleys and rooms you would go and just find this bizarre stuff you could fall asleep to. And I'd wanted to work with a lot of these people, and we didn't have time for each other a lot of the time. And so kind of wanting to do that. And it's been neat in me making, bringing all you together and kind of making this concept and trying to sell people on it. And then seeing other people who around the same years were doing the same. And then a lot of this stuff released within like 6 to 12 months of each other.
Yeah, it's really kind of all piled up. And, there's certain hubs, Twitter being one, the subreddit for audio drama as well, where you never know when something new is just going to crop up out of absolutely nowhere.
Yeah.
And it's heartening to me to see people really lean into the stranger, more, I mean, I would dare say poetic side of audio drama, and because it is really such a cool form of self-expression and storytelling that I think is really wide open for the taking for anyone that really wants to sit down and put some time into creating their own little pocket universe.
Yeah. Well, and then with this, just really leaning into microfiction as a way to get different creators and actors and people of all experience levels and clout levels and, histories to be able to work in the same space on the same project without it taking too much time from any individual.
That was a big thing at the beginning. It was like, we do not want to be overwhelmed and get stuck in a giant hole with some super ambitious project. We spent a whole, year getting scripts, putting things together slowly, bit by bit, with longer breaks. We went at our own pace, and we managed to get it all out without huge hiccups.
Well, and it let people kind of decide their level, because I contacted a number of people from the get-go to shout out some names. Like, I got the concept, I made a list. I'm like, well, Richard needs to, if Richard doesn't want to be a part of this, I don't think this can work. Richard's just, great friend, fascinating individual, who back when PodCons were a thing would host and throw parties and his own esoteric spaces. So it's like, I need Richard to get in on this. Follow him on social media at Timescanner, if social media is still here by the time the episode comes out. So I hit up Richard. I hit up James Oliva, who made What's the Frequency, which is one of the great pieces of weird fiction, has yet to be dethroned. Just to ask him, I know he had done a lot with collaborating with a number of people, casting, working with actors with different things, just to get some advice from him. I contacted A.R. Olivieri because they're just like the master of microfiction in this space, and also loves getting into alternate ways of distribution. So I talked to them about like, hey, what if you have advice with making a microfiction? What is that advice? And they had a lot of good perspective on there. And then there were a handful of writers. Like, I knew I wanted you to be in it. I contacted Eli because Eli's just brilliant, and was stoked that she jumped on, because the Far Meridian, it's not quite microfiction, but it's just a beautiful story. Like, it is something that I hand to people when they're like, what is audio drama doing? I'm like, this is something audio drama is doing. And then Toe, I have worked with on a number of things kind of behind the scenes, and Toe also knows more and loves like role-playing games more than anyone I know, while also knowing what their pitfall, like just having a thumb on what the pitfalls are.
Right, just look at Rogue Runners. I mean,
Rogue Runners is stunning, and the Caravan is, you can see the roots of things like Diablo and Final Fantasy in that in Caravan, but if you didn't know those, like you don't need to. It can go the other way. You can listen to Caravan and then go back. And like something, because when I was doing research on weird fiction in general, I really loved a lot of the stuff I was finding, but so much of it is homogenous, as in it's people coming from a specific background, right? And weird fiction is something where like you should be able to go, you're out in these woods and find someone in a cabin who can tell you a weird story. You should be able to find someone in the Arctic who could tell you a weird story, right? Rich people, poor people. And this is a show that kind of plays with a lot of gaming traditions, which have typically come from like white men and their ideas of other things. Like I've read a bunch of Gary Gygax's notes, and it is interesting, their attempts at incorporating diverse backgrounds, and where I think they had kind of the right idea and not the right resources, and where they didn't have the right idea. And so Toe helped a lot and added a lot when it came to like what, if we're making this collective dream space, if the technology going behind the Goblet Wire in world would be used by various communities for communication and whatnot. Like, what does this look like, and how can we not run into the issue of trying to fix this in post, right? We want to build this into the bones of this system. And so all of you collectively helped me develop and create what this is. You all sent in scripts that helped define what certain aspects, like certain interactions with the operators looks like, certain things the dictator would say. And then Toe and Eli would come in and, add thoughts and look at scripts, and you just kept adding to it. You kept bugging me and kept taking my phone calls, and eventually just fully molded into a full-on co-creator of the thing. Like, without Justin, we would not have synthscapes behind this thing, right? Episodes would have been a lot harder to put together. It's been like invaluable splitting that work. And so I gotta thank you for that and shout you out.
Yeah, I mean, it's a perfect excuse to keep me behind the keyboard, because working solo, as you know, doing everything, it really can burn you out and leave you unmotivated. But having a more specific and defined role at a certain point really, helps me just to keep sitting down at the mini keyboard and tweaking knobs and stuff.
Yeah.
There are times where you would send me something because you're on the West Coast, and so I'll wake up and have like a message from you, which would be like a little draft of an episode or a track, and I'd be like, well, normally I'd lay here for 2 hours in some sort of existential pit of despair, and I would just jump right out of bed and plug everything in and try to get it back as soon as I could. It was a really exciting time, because in building it, we're like, we really don't know what this is going to sound like all the way and how it's going to come together. And I still don't fully grasp how it's kind of just like living now.
There is something about this, because everyone I've talked to about this show to get them involved has been like, this works. This makes sense. There's like, how did you come up with this idea? And I'm like, I've been rattling, because the need I was trying to fill wasn't the Goblet Wire. It was like, what is a way I can keep some of these weird fiction voices and traditions alive in this space? What are ways that I can look to the future of the space while also paying tribute to the past with doing kind of a phone call, found footage-y sounding thing? And what are ways I can collaborate with all these people I want to collaborate with and who want to collaborate with each other when we don't have time for each other? Because it often takes a year or two to just get an audio drama out, let alone like everything else that goes into it. And I kind of had my list of people to initially tackle that with, but it was a problem because I'm like, I could do a weird fiction anthology and it'll just be curated by the actors, but like I have a hard time with anthology. And I also knew I would just torture. I'd find a way to be like, oh, I just have to write a 10-page script and that's my story. I'd find a way to torture myself for 6 months working on that script.
Right.
Whereas with the Goblet Wire, it's like you got 500 to 700 words, to get, there's not a lot of time to put this. So when I finally had like I was developing the initial Goblet Wire by running old school Renaissance games with people I knew. Because for years and years, I've worked on this like dreamscape role-playing thing of like, what's a way that you could be playing Call of Cthulhu or Dungeons and Dragons and your characters go to sleep and all meet in this same space? And so like working on that, and then everything just kind of started clicking together. I was like, I think this will work. I told PJ Scott Blankenship, who's the creator of Hit the Bricks, about it, because I usually don't tell people about my ideas because I don't like ideas. I think ideas are evil and distracting. Like I already have a show I'm working on, right? So if another idea is going to crop up, it needs to have room in the life. And I gave it a month before I started talking to people, because we've all had the experience where you're like, oh, this will be great. And you put a bunch of work into it for 2 weeks, and now you've added a multi-year commitment to your life that isn't probably contributing to your life anything that your first project wouldn't.
You see the trajectory of where it's just going to fall and completely fizzle out.
Right. So with this, it was just like, no, I think this will, and that's where, contacting people. So it's, and I have, if I, to give many members in the audience just great FOMO, I have this kind of writer's master doc that's this, evolving document that has the core of what the Goblet Wire is in it. Yeah. And it works because it's quite simple. You can read it pretty quickly, and the ways you can add on it are...
It's very wide.
I don't know what the limits are, right?
No.
Without me adding anything to the doc right now, I think we could easily make 50 episodes of this. Yeah. I have things to add.
The last person I sent it to, it kept them up at night because they were just thinking like what they wanted to do with it. So
yeah, well, because because this is not an anthology, but it plays to the strengths of anthology in that because it's real people playing the game, quote unquote, right? So you have to write a player who you could meet in real life. But then in the game, there's all these different things that can happen and all these different avenues. So the writers don't have to worry about stepping on each other's toes as long as they follow these kind of specific rules.
Yeah.
And we saw how Eli in her episodes often wasn't even in the Goblet Wire, right? She has a whole episode where it's just two operators talking. That's a period piece. It takes place decades before the other episodes do. And then another episode in a train station where there's a little bit of engagement with the Goblet Wire.
Yeah.
And then you had Toe, who very much explored what it is to be a min-max or what it is to be someone who loves games, what it is to fully embrace this thing and how that kind of plays with the struggles of being the kind of person who often plays games where it's you got to pay rent, you got to work, you have roommates.
Yeah.
You might be into that or not be into that. And then you just, I feel captured the voice of the thing. I love that my episodes are my least favorite episodes by a long shot. And now when I write episodes for the Goblet Wire, I'm how can I lay more track to establish more flavors and stuff in here without worrying so much about how they're going to come across.
Well,
but you sent that first episode, which we made the first episode of the show. And what was it? Ocular metamorphosis. I was just damn, that's double thumbs up.
Yeah. Well, with that, I just wanted to, it was the first kind of laying it all out and how would this structurally work. And you had very much just a little vignette that was really narrow and focused, but kind of had a really wide sort of feel to it. And, I would say with your trio of episodes was very much like a spine of how, you get to follow someone through 3 sessions, right, of what it's like to play and really try to accomplish something that, if I can help it, I want to explore that even more with whatever I contribute going forward. And I found that all of that kind of pairing together really, the Goblet Wire is a strange multi-limbed skeleton just that keeps on having meat thrown on its bones. And it's learning to walk in stranger, more interesting ways. And it might be on the ceiling the next moment or swimming beneath your feet.
Oh yeah, because I've got some mini-series pitches in that doc that just follow a completely different format of the show of all right, let's do a serial style journalist, fully in the style of those podcasts of someone who's looking into the Goblet Wire and being what is this thing, right? And we just kind of have an intentional order that we're rolling these out for. So right at this point, we've concluded batch 1. We're currently working on batch 2 and batch 3.
Yeah.
You and I don't have any episodes in batch 2 or 3, nor do Toe or Eli.
No.
I've set it up. Every writer I contact, I say you can write 1 to 3 episodes. This is about the length they should be. Send me your pitches. I can help you develop ideas. And then largely people have just found really interesting ways to explore different questions. I won't spoil what Eli's episode that takes place in that apothecary is doing, but it's doing something really interesting that Eli just saw a thing in the game of oh, there's this exploit. What's the answer to this exploit? And I wrote the answer, and she's I want to do a whole episode on that. And so I've loved bringing on more people, and we already have scripts for a lot of the next episodes. But yeah, so I get a group of writers, I get, say, 1 to 3 episodes, go off, and then I let people, I say, you can be as involved or not as involved with the rest of the shows as you want. If you want to keep writing, we'll find places for it. And then we have some mini series. So we've got batch 2 and 3 that we're working on at the same time, which I need to finalize writers, because there's a lot of people who want to work on it and don't necessarily have time yet. And then people like I work rather slowly when it comes to writing, whereas some people can send me 3 episodes in a week.
Yeah.
And so we've got those. I have the trailer for this. The first thing on the feed is a storyline you all haven't heard yet, because it's going to be a mini series. And so kind of splitting things up into batches of like, all right, this is the bulk of the show. This is where we're bringing people together. And then mini series are ways to like explore a concept or a person more thoroughly, like 5 or 6 episodes. The same length, not need apply. And so we have a couple of those in production as well. And I believe that'll be the next thing that hits the feed before then we get into batch 2 and 3 in 2023. And then there's just a lot of other weird stuff, because there's things like I consider, and this will actually probably get us into the questions, the Q&A, the questions you've asked us. And thank you so much for sending those in. We're listening to the auditions for the Goblet Wire. I'm like, this is batch 0. Like, got 120 like tracks here of people recording kind of the same thing in different ways and playing what they didn't realize at the time was playing the Goblet Wire.
Yeah.
So what I did for the auditions was everyone had the same monologue, which was someone leaving a message for someone over an answering machine. And you had to flip a coin to determine if you were recording that from home or from a payphone outside of an abandoned diner. And so that's going to change how your audition comes off. And then you had to roll a 6-sided die to determine who you were calling, whether it be a loved one, a family member, a stranger. And all of those made it so we had the same monologue, the same message on this answering machine, done in just dozens of different ways.
Yeah, it was
and
fascinating.
It gets weird listening to it over and over again. And then at the end, people could select their own what was a passphrase. And I imagine some people were probably a little spooked when they heard the show and realized that I made them play the game to audition, which is something I'm probably going to keep up on.
Yeah.
Because that way you get a little extra Goblet Wire detail if you do participate in the audition process.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's definitely one of the more inventive auditioning kind of like set of rules that have been put out there.
And it's just a hack for me. I don't love writing copy, and I worry that if all of the audition material isn't equally interesting, that it's going to get skewed. So as much as possible, I want people to read the same thing, but like have some flexibility.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's, a lot of this process is just like, there are these limitations that I have or that others have, and I want to make the best possible thing that plays within those. But if you don't mind, I'm going to get into questions.
Yeah, let's read them.
So the first question, and some people submitted names, some people didn't, so I'm going to keep names off of it just to keep it consistent, but you'll know who you are. First question. First off, thanks to the cast and crew for building out such an interesting and weird show. Getting lost in this world has been a highlight of the last few months. There's nothing quite like it. Looking out to the future, do you plan to audition out new players for future batches?
Oh, yeah.
The answer, absolutely. I love, if the goal with finding writers for this show is grabbing people from all over the indie audio drama space and sometimes outside of it. I have someone who's a black metal concept album creator in New York who's writing some episodes. We have some people who are in like video games who we're bringing on. The same thing with actors. And the show is made where you don't need to have the nicest recording set up to participate in it. And that's actually created really interesting opportunities. Like in Eli's episode with the 2 operators, that's the first episode we get to hear from the operator's perspective, because the difference in mic quality created, it was like, oh, well, the actor who is the player just sounded great with a phone effect on it, right? And so that was like, cool, now we're going to see a little bit of behind the curtain of what does it sound like from an operator's perspective.
Yeah, exactly. So, when we put out another audition call, please record and send it in, because, we can really, that was a really good example of, pushing the show in just in a specific episode in a slightly different way that I think worked out very much to it's like aesthetic benefit.
Yeah, it wasn't the plan. Like, had they not recorded it that way, it wouldn't have been that way.
Yeah.
And that was same. There was another episode, another Eli episode, where I ended up putting it over a car speaker, which then asked the question, like, okay, so apparently some of these games are recorded. Who's listening to this?
Yeah.
Right? What's going on here? And so being able to kind of take the things that we receive and then turn those into like what is the most benefit, like what is the best way for this to come out, and I promise the next audition process is going to be just as weird as the first one. We're going to keep that going, and I'm going to hoard all of these recordings in the background,
right?
As well, because just hearing all of the auditions, it's a fascinating. I'm sorry that I get to hear aspects of the Goblet Wire that you don't get to hear. I'm going to we're doing a lot of interesting kind of weird things with the show going into the future, and I feel like that's one of the first elements is like what part of the Goblet Wire have leaked out into the real world in their own way. And we'll announce those on the various social media, and we'll put an announcement on the feed too now that certain social medias we use are coming to question. The second question, what is the writing process like for this show's format compared to more, for lack of a better term, conventional stories? What do you think?
That's tough because I feel like I don't tell very conventional stories. I mean, I think that it's different for every writer. I mean, we have our core stuff. I would say for me, it's very much more a poetic type of exploration. I don't like outlining. I don't like thinking ahead. I kind of, visualize one thing and then see where it goes, which very much almost, I guess, from like the player's perspective. I don't really think about it from the dictator's perspective. For me, it's very much player-centric and sort of like feeling emotions and voice. Whereas, someone writing a trio of episodes or a miniseries might have more of a blocked out kind of plot-centric focus. But for me, it's very much total wild exploration, like, I love doing in anything that I write.
Yeah. And from what I've seen, just talking with other writers, the limitation of microfiction creates some really interesting stuff. Because you'll have someone who turns in an episode and you'll be like, this is 2 episodes. And that oftentimes that evolves into something beautiful as well. But having that 600 and 900 words just to get a thing out where you're like, okay, what player do you want to follow? Why are you following this player? Why this moment in their play? Because a lot of these players we're never going to come back to. Some of them we will. Like as writers are like, hey, I want to, pick this one up again, or I want to, follow my own storyline again. Like that's absolutely allowed. And this kind of gets us away from the anthology thing of like, they're all playing the same system. So every episode does teach you something about how what the Goblet Wire is and how it works, even if you're not finding out like what is Fisher of Snakes gonna do next.
Exactly. It's almost more of like capturing a slice of life of a player. So there's like external factors. It's not every episode is super game centric, but yeah, because of the limited word count, you very much are just capturing like a Polaroid of someone's experience playing the game, and then using that to kind of build up slowly over time. But we're not really. It's a ship sailing on the wind of this ghost that's been created. We're not like super hard steering it in any one direction writing wise.
Yeah, and it's doing it naturally. Like there hasn't been a need to. If we got to the point where too many episodes were starting to spin their wheels, like I've, of course direct that a bit more. But at every time someone introduces something, it's like that's better than what I would have done. Right?
There are things I would have never thought of,
and that's every writer is doing that. And I'm being very picky with kind of who I bring on. My ambition for this project is I eventually want to work with like every writer in the audio drama space. I want to work with every actor, but especially with these first 3 batches, I'm being very intentional in who I pick, what kind of stories they tell, just so we can get this fleshed out as efficiently and thoroughly and, with the consideration that it needs as possible. Here's a fun question that I've heard multiple times. I'm sure it's been asked a million times, but how do I play?
Well, for me, when I play the Goblet Wire, I put a blindfold on. I have a phone in my pocket, my coin and my die, and I just walk out as far as I can in the woods. And then when I feel most terrified, I take it off and find a little piece of wood and I phone in. But I mean, that's really all you need to play the Goblet Wire is, a connection to satellite phone, landline. I mean, I don't think we really explored radio waves or Morse code or anything like that. But it's meant to be very accessible. If you get this number, you should be able to play.
Right. And that's I think some of the appeal of the concept of just like, if you have this phone number, you can call it and you'll get something on the other end. Yeah. And then if you have your passphrase, if you have your call sign, you can get into a specific, place in the Goblet Wire following a specific projection.
Yeah.
And then if you have the right materials to play it with, then you're golden.
Yeah. It's a game that it adapts to whoever calls in. Yeah. I think we feel.
So there's in the way where like, if you get deep into the occult and you learn different avenues of magic and kind of what magic actually is for most people who participate in it, there's those types of ways of like, how do I play the Goblet Wire? Like, I'm curious to see if down the line we get like a Goblet Wire fan fiction scene going where people just they understand the rules well enough to just write their own stories and start doing that.
I'm all on board.
Yeah, and you have my blessing. Right. I probably for legal reasons don't email them to us, but like
right. And we've been talking about some ways to get some more interactive Goblet Wire stuff for fans to interact with in a more game playing way.
Yeah, that'll be the last question.
Yeah.
I ask. We'll kind of give you some more hints to that. I will say though, the hardest part of pitching this to writers was everyone thought that I was trying to make the Goblet Wire. I was like, no, this is impossible to not be a cheap version of like whatever we're doing. There's so much more you can do with like telling a story of a thing than you can making that thing where you run into limitations. And I don't want limitations on this project.
Not at all.
But we do have ways that we feel will fit and will not cheapen the experience that I'll get into. So now we're getting into some lore stuff. Does the dictator have free will? Or is he generated by a set of rules, assuming these are mutually exclusive options?
Yeah. What's the difference? I can't shoot my brain out of my head and think while it's plastered to a tree. Or can I? Maybe.
I feel like we're all kind of locked into a fairly deterministic philosophy. Just that's not universal, but we tend to live there where it's like, is there free will? Are we all not dominoes?
I would say that on the line between no free will and just absolute determinism is the voice of Richard just vibrating on and oscillating on both sides at the same time almost.
Yeah, to give a more, to answer the question, I think you're actually, I know it's an obscure show and that's not going to change. We will always give you more information. We will never give you enough information, right? There are questions you have now that will become very clear and fleshed out later. And then there are some questions that would kill the show to answer directly. The dictator follows specific rules, which are the rules of the Goblet Wire. Within that, the dictator has a lot of flexibility, but everything the dictator takes and does is determined by people, right? It's responses to people, it's things being added by people. We do have a history of when did the Goblet Wire first pop up in its form? What technology was it based on? What is going on with this figure, right? We've got these switchboards going on that the operators are using to hook things up. And when you listen to episodes, you'll hear switches and music and in the inflections in the dictator's voice that suggests some kind of analog technology at play. But then you have Richard, who talks about the dictator and is like, this could easily be some guy in a velvet room in the basement of a mansion who just has all these toys and things that he's messing with,
right.
Takes all these calls one by one.
Yeah, I've had so many interesting ideas about the nature of the dictator, and I think that it's something that, is just, again, with the ship kind of steering itself, will provide its own answers in time with everyone that adds to it.
And we definitely define that, like, when people, there's this whole, you get into like black box storytelling, and is that J.J. Abrams is known for that, of just like the mystery box.
Yeah.
I'm a latecomer to the world of writing. I utilize mystery boxes. I'm not a user of that. I'm not going to tell you a story unless I know where it's going and unless there's a satisfying answer. With the Goblet Wire, we're not just throwing weird stuff out there without some idea of how it's going to connect to things in the future. So do take comfort of it's not just being made up as it goes. That's that writer's doc. It's like, here's exactly how all this works.
Yeah.
Go start uncovering it the way that you want. But I'm very proud of just the Dictator as a figure, because it can be so many things. And then just Richard's whole involvement with that. And a lot of that in the way where this is a very collaborative story that we alter based on the recordings we get, the scripts we get, all of that. Like Richard's performance originally with all the no texts in those last 3 episodes, I was going to use the same no text for everyone. But he was just so subtly expressive in each one that I'm like, no, I got to use all of these. And I started actually creating distance between the Dictator and the player using these vocal effects to kind of express. And so that alone like starts fleshing out what is the personality of this thing or this guy.
I had wondered that specifically in those episodes, because it was really tempting to be like, you could make it sound so much more mechanical. But I think the expressiveness of it, especially in some of his performance across the board, can be very calm and almost reassuring to angry to that. And I think that's as we've continued to develop, one thing that's definitely becoming a little bit more concrete is the flexibility there.
And this is where we try to keep the creation of the show as honest and in line with how the Goblet Wire in the world works as well, where it's this constant collaboration and alteration, and someone gives a performance you weren't expecting, that becomes canon now, right? It's not a matter of like calling back and saying, hey, can I get a retake? That's not what I imagine. It's a way going, cool, this is what I got in response. Like we're all participating in the ritual of creating this experience. And in doing that, you have to let people contribute their thing, and then you have to run with it. Though it also requires direction and curation to make sure it's all consistent. Because if everyone came in with the first ideas they had, it wouldn't necessarily be cohesive, and I think that would make for a bad listening experience. Like you want every episode to be playing the same game in the same world, though more into that later. So how much of a role does the type of dice and coin play in the player's experience? A lot.
I was gonna say, how much of that do you really want to go into, other than just it does?
It does. Pay attention to the die that are being used, what's in common and what's different about them, and then pay attention to the coins as well. Like, what does the player tell about the coin? Because you have, in Eli's episode, someone wants to use a different die than they typically do, and they're rejected. They aren't able to do that. They have to go fish out their die from the vacuum cleaner. Whereas you have other episodes of people who use a similar material and they're allowed to go through. There are slight hints. Once you know the answer, you'll be able to go through batch 1 and actually separate the episodes on what's going on just based on the sound effects alone and kind of certain things alone. You're not there yet. You could do it. I don't expect you to do it.
It would be tough to do right now.
It will become more explicit.
Yeah. But yes, that's definitely a designed feature of the Goblet Wire.
And I will, and that goes for most things with the Goblet Wire. Like you'll notice the operators have certain rules they follow, and they have some certain rules they seemingly break. So when you hear the same operator pop up again, look at what are they doing? Is another operator doing the same thing, right? Such as you have the operator you invented who loves sharing his call sign. right? Whereas then you have another operator where that's a whole thing to just get that out of them.
Yeah.
And the fact that they even have a call sign is telling it its own way. It's like, what is their experience with the Goblet Wire?
Yeah, exactly.
And then we have our second to last question. The player who offered their phone, do we know them? I'm bad with hearing voices, sorry. This is in one of Eli's episodes, the one that takes place in the train station. None of those are return actors. So the player who gets fed up and gives their phone to another seemingly player, which shows that there are in fact other players you can interact with out in the world who have done this. That's one of the things that episode tells us. Is like, okay, you've got, here's two players interacting. You don't know who receives the phone. It does connect with another episode in the show where something weird happens. So, but beyond that, you don't know. And then the final question, which ties in this other stuff. Will the Goblet Wire have a Patreon or similar donation subscription option to come? If not, how can we monetarily support?
Oh, cue fanfare and angels descending from the clouds.
Yeah, I'm actually partially here in Georgia recording some stuff for the Goblet Wire Patreon, which will be coming before long. I've been paying for the show out of pocket. We have a thing set in place where right now it doesn't pay much. And because the goal with this show is like, I want to eventually get like established, famous writers to make Goblet Wire episodes. I want to get weird fiction writers who only write zines in a specific city to write episodes of the Goblet Wire. And a problem that can happen with that is you look at your budget for a batch and it's like, well, this guy's rate is 10 times the normal cost of an episode.
Yep.
And where we're grabbing creators from all over the place who have different levels of success. And I have a lot of opinions about how our world is built in a way that tends to reward certain groups and factions more than others. I'm not into that. Every writer gets paid the same. Every actor gets paid the same. And the goal is once we raise money, everyone gets a raise kind of retroactively if we raise money. So right now I'm paying out of pocket. But also, this has been a collaborative experience, and I will take people's money. I will turn that money. I'm going to tell you, I do not see a world where the Goblet Wire is for profit at all. I'm not making any deals with any production companies.
No ads.
Advertisers. Ads would just be really irritating with like a 5-minute show.
Yeah.
We're not doing any of that. We're keeping it fully independent so that we can be as flexible as possible. But also, we're in a position where I could make almost infinite episodes of this show if I had the resources.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to stop you all from joining in on that, and that's where the Patreon is going to go. We're going to do a Patreon. We have our tiers kind of lined up and figured out, and I'll give you kind of a hint as to what those are, so that you can also just join in this process in the same way where if you audition, right, you're participating in the Goblet Wire. If you're listening and responding, if you're sharing it with people, you're participating. If you're writing for it, you're participating. I always like doing bonus stuff for you to listen to with Patreon. So right now we have it lined up. The plan is to have 4 tiers. So we'll have an accessibility tier that's just you can throw us a couple bucks. We'll say thank you. Good to go. Our second tier, which we're planning on doing a 6-sided tier, because if the first tier is $2 for, a 2-sided coin, the second tier has to be $6 for 6-sided die. And that will get you, all of the normal fun stuff like an early access to an episode. It will get you a series we're calling, which I'll announce here, Esoteric, in which I'm going to take... there's a lot of influences that go into the Goblet Wire and a lot of weird life experiences that go into the Goblet Wire, and Esoteric is going to be a way for us to explore that. So you can expect episodes with the different creators of the show talking about something that helped them come to this place. So like I'll probably do an episode on the old school Renaissance. But I also know people like in the occult, and I know people who are programmers who get into like esoteric programming. And we just have a lot of interesting people in the circle where their experiences do line up or help you understand the Goblet Wire better. So we're going to do that as like a fun Patreon series that you can listen to if you like the vibe of the Goblet Wire. It's going to be like the talk radio of what people who play the Goblet Wire would make together.
Yeah, it's going to be really rad, I think. The way that, because we've gone back and forth a bit with laying out what could be talked about, and the people that worked on the show are very interesting and have a wide array of interests, and have all used that and brought different aspects to the show. So it'll be a really cool highlight to get to let them just sort of, let all of that out with this little, this kind of center of gravity of the show.
Right. So you'll have, and where the Goblet Wire, those episodes are short, you'll have a longer thing that you can listen to. It will also come with supercuts. So I want people to be able to get into the show easily. And I know if you're on a car trip, that's when a lot of people like listen to podcasts. And it's not convenient to click on 13 different micro episodes with full credits and everything to get the story. So like batch 1 will have a supercut where it's just every episode without the credits and everything, and then all of the credits are at the end. So first one's going to be free. We're going to put it out there because I'm assuming if you listen to the whole first supercut and then you get through batch 2 and want another supercut, help us make the show. And we'll put that on the Patreon as a thing. And we might even do like a thing like on a Bandcamp where you could just buy them.
Yeah.
Because I'll take money. Like there's so many I have 8 people who were immediately working on the next batches. And I have like 15 writers on my short list who are all amazing, right? And that's with trying to kind of keep the lid on this box as well. So give us funds. I'll skip ahead to the 4th tier, which is going to be a producer tier. And that's just you. If you want to pay for an episode of the Goblet Wire, we will have a tier that is the current cost of what it takes to produce episodes of the Goblet Wire. And you will do that, and we will put your name as a producer of the thing. I think for people who have some money and want to contribute to something like this, every month that you're on that tier, that will go directly into making an episode.
Oh, yeah.
But then the fun, spicy middle tier, which is going to be more expensive than I typically would have a Patreon thing, but a lot less expensive than a producer tier, is where we're trying to do a more interactive thing. So that tier is going to be called Call Sign. We're going to, ideally, this is our current plan, much like episode 0, Birth of a Projection, we are going to set up a questionnaire that you can answer, and then we will get you a call sign. The intention after that, and we have to figure out how this works with like international shipping, because we know we have a lot of listeners around the world, send you the materials to play the Goblet Wire, and then you'll be able to use those materials to do a collaborative Goblet Wire game via the Patreon.
Yeah, through polling.
Through polling. So it will be, we'll write a chunk of an episode. You can go through and decide what that player is going to do next. And we will likely do it in a way where this is something where all the patrons are literally playing this. When I say literally playing, I mean within the story. You're not going to be controlling Joe Smo. You're going to be controlling this projection that's controlled by a bunch of people.
Yeah, exactly.
And that way, like when we need a coin flip, we can source it from a patron.
Exactly.
And so that I think will be fun for people who want to get their own official call sign. And then those participate in an ongoing activity. Ideally, we'll do one per batch. And it will also help us make more of the show.
Oh, yeah.
Because I have a certain amount that I can pay out of pocket to keep the show going. But if we get more, we can just do way more with the thing.
Right.
And those are our current plans. And that kind of goes back to like, how can I play the Goblet Wire? It's, of course, not going to be the exact same experience as if you had the right phone number and a call sign and passphrase. But
yeah, I mean, being able to hop on there and see everyone playing the same story, and, we can do things where, everyone can roll. And if you post it, we'll just, take the closest average of whatever the roll is and use that.
Yeah.
And, it's, again, like the people who've worked on the show have all shaped it pretty dramatically. It's kind of an ability there's no telling what, the choices that everyone there would lead us to that is going to inspire something that actually gets turned into canon in the show.
Right.
We're very sponge-like in taking, any kind of cool detail or idea that crops up, wherever it comes from, and incorporating it. So I'm excited because I think it's going to be a really cool sort of collaborative storytelling experience.
And it's doable. We'll probably have a cap on. We'll start with a cap on how many patrons can get in that tier, because like realistically, an unreasonable people aren't going to sign up for that. But there is a situation where if 10,000 people signed up for it, it's like, well, I don't know if I can mail 10,000 people a 6-sided die and a coin and like all the little materials you need to play the game. So we'll start with a cap, and we'll increase the cap as we find kind of the happy medium of what's manageable for us having to have our regular jobs and the shows we make while also keeping the Goblet Wire going reliably.
Yeah, and to the point of how do I play the Goblet Wire? Well, after listening to this, you should kind of have an idea of the flexibility of that. And if you can't participate, or even if you do and want to do more on your own, we're all indie algae that just been scraped off the glass of a great ship out at sea. Do it on your own. Get a friend, call them, and just do it. You've listened to the show. You kind of know what the procedures are. That might be something where we could put together some hack together version to play with your friends at home.
And that's the plan.
Yeah.
Because there are also different like crowdfunding projects I want to do with the Goblet Wire there's a card game in the world of the Goblet Wire that I've hinted at in one episode, that I have a whole series of episodes just about that card game. And like, I want to make those cards.
Yeah.
And this is, by the way, this is where we're getting into the pie of the sky of like things that we have on the to-do list once we have accomplished the base. Like we're not trying to bite off more than we can chew, but the more people I talk to and the more people who get involved, the more feasible it is to have years down the line, like if you were part of this experience that was the Goblet Wire, you've got some cards and you got a die and you've got like a little instruction manual, you have all these different things, and maybe I'm calling it now, first episode of Esoteric, we're going to talk about the OSR, the old school Renaissance, so you can know what I was bringing into the game aspect of the Goblet Wire, some influences, because a lot of what's nice about the old school Renaissance tradition of gaming, as opposed to things like a 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons or a Call of Cthulhu, is they're so hackable, and a lot of those rule sets take place over a couple pages. So I do want to release like OSR manuals of the Goblet Wire in the future, but you don't need to wait for me, right?
Yeah.
If you want more perspective and details and where to start, sign up for that Patreon, listen to that first episode when it comes out. But beyond that, you do your own role-playing games, right? Like, take what you've learned here, and you can you're gonna make your own thing. The show's gonna grow in its own way, and if there's conflict, that can be part of it, right? If we introduce a concept that goes against something that you've done, like find ways for that to work.
I grew up in Anderson, South Carolina, which has the Jockey Lot, which is a gigantic flea market with like weird guns, exotic animals that are probably on the black market, and bootleg stuff. Bootleg copies of every movie, video game, system that you've thought of. And like, the idea of someone like hacking the Goblet Wire and making a bootleg version is something that, you're going to get 2 thumbs up from me if you want to go all the way into the deep end.
And I will give a little spoiler alert. Bootleg versions of the Goblet Wire are a built-in part of the show.
Mm-hmm. We already have them.
Right. That's part of the kind of writing options of where you get different instances and like versions of this game. So
yeah, and we even have, I guess maybe we don't want to go all the way into that right now, but in terms of branches and stuff, we'll maybe get into that another time.
Yeah, there's a lot going on, but
yeah,
I hope we answered some of the questions. I know we're not being as clear, and we're not trying to be obtuse. We're cultivating a specific experience, and I kind of know when I want you to know things, and it'll be fun. I also like things with re-listen value. For once certain things are answered, you can go back. Like if you listen to all of the Goblet Wire up until this point, and you go back to episode 0, you'll understand way more than you did that first time.
Oh, sure.
And that will continue to be the thing.
Yeah, we're people of mystery here at the Goblet Wire, and we don't want to leave anyone sitting there completely in the dark, but especially with the end cap of this batch, like a large part of it is just the feeling and kind of like sitting with the weird and strangeness of not only the show but yourself in relation to it, really.
Yeah. So thank you so much for tuning in. Look forward to the supercut, which should be one of the next things hitting the feed. We'll do an official announcement when we are ready to do auditions for Batch 2 and Batch 3, and then we will also do an announcement when the Patreon actually drops, so those of you who want to get in and helping us make the show can do that. But with that, any final comments before I hit stop on this recorder?
I don't know. Find your nearest fountain and throw a coin into it, and don't look at which way it landed.
I think that's great advice. Yeah. All right, we'll see you soon.